Hello and welcome to The Voluntarist. Many people over the years have worked towards proving, or at least legitimizing, secular ethics. Religious doctrine has, for the most part, dominated the realm of ethics for all of recorded history. I would posit that a deist approach to ethics is not helpful in the process of reasoning to objective universal principles. This is, in my opinion, simply because personal gods change from person to person along with the doctrine and other teachings. So to make cases for ethical principles from the point of religion is to trap ourselves in a philosophical purgatory, constantly stuck in a back and forth between which religion is right or wrong with no objective way to pull ourselves out. Therefore, we must strive to answer the questions of rightness and wrongness from a secular perspective, beginning with axioms that are true for every human being regardless of their religion. However, in this video I will not be proving secular ethics. That is beyond my capacity at the moment. However, I will attempt to dispel the myth of moral relativism. Moral relativists will argue that there is no such thing as a universal right or wrong. What may be right for you may not be right for another. From my own experience, I have not been able to reason any universal positive rights or moral obligations, as these are highly situational and often violate negative rights. However, as far as negative rights are concerned, I have been able to find rules which describe what no person should ever do under any circumstances. To reach these conclusions, we have to start from statements which are self-evident and true for all human beings as we exist in nature. One such statement is that each human being possesses de facto ownership over their own body. Now, what does that mean? De facto ownership is, in the economic sense, the effective real ownership of something, which is totally unrelated to legal ownership. If you own a car on paper, that is to say legally, but your dad decides to take it for a drive, while your father has his hands on the steering wheel and his foot on the gas pedal, he is explicitly controlling the car, making him the de facto owner. What's the difference between your father driving the car and you controlling your body? Anyone can drive the car. It has no consciousness, no awareness. It's not alive, it's just a machine. You, on the other hand, are a living being, capable of autonomous action and thought. In a sense, you are both the driver and the car simultaneously. For this reason, it can be said that you, by virtue of being alive, are in de facto ownership of yourself. Furthermore, losing this ownership over your own body would reduce you to being either dead or in a subhuman state of existence which I can only describe as being a living object, subject completely to the will of others. Now, it can be stated with confidence that each person, while in a state of nature, exclusively owns their own body. Just look at one of your hands. Is that not your hand? This is an example of a universal principle. It's true for every human being from every part of the world believing in any particular religion for all time, whether they will acknowledge it or not. Moral relativists will argue that because people may deny their own self-ownership, and plenty of people do deny this, unfortunately, this denial somehow makes the principle of self-ownership less true. First, a moral relativist must have had to assume de facto ownership of their body in order to use their vocal cords or hands on a keyboard in an effort to refute the claim that they own themselves. In doing so, they've only helped to prove the validity of this universal principle. Second, denial of a truth does not make it any less true, just as the belief in a falsehood does not make it any less false. We can take 2 plus 2 to equal 4. This is fundamentally true. If you argue against that, I can't help you. If I choose to believe that 2 plus 2 equals 3, that doesn't mean for me 2 plus 2 equals 3, and for you 2 plus 2 equals 4. It just means I'm wrong, plain and simple. Belief is not a prerequisite of truth. And third, if you're a moral relativist, you can't even tell me I'm wrong, because I believe I'm right, and according to moral relativism, that makes me right for me. And of course, I have to touch on cultural relativism, which some people refer to as cultural Marxism. The way this relates to moral relativism is the notion that culture A and culture B have different conflicting moral norms, which creates a system in which certain actions can be morally good in culture A while simultaneously being bad in culture B. Additionally, the members of neither culture are thought to have any authority to comment on the morality of the other. To refute this, I offer another universally true statement. No one consents to being murdered. This is always true. For a killing to be a murder, the victim must necessarily not want to be killed. This is the definition of murder. In order for a culture to hold murder as universally preferable behavior, as discussed by Stefan Molyneux, everyone in that culture would have to both prefer killing and being killed, while simultaneously never consenting to be killed, because murder, which is preferable in this culture, requires that the victim does not consent. This is the self-contradictory nature of universalizing actions which violate consent. So we have established that murder cannot be universally preferable. Now, let's assume that culture A does adopt murder as a moral good, and they make it work by having slaves they can kill at their leisure, and in their moral code, slaves aren't considered to be people, so morality only applies to the ruling class. In culture B, murder is evil, unless, of course, you want to die, then it's okay if you ask someone to kill you. That's like assisted suicide. It's the consent of people that determines the moral value of an action. Now let's have person A from culture A murder person B from culture B. Has B been wronged by A? A thinks that murder is a moral good, but B didn't want to die, so being killed violates his or her consent. A moral relativist would say that person A should be forgiven because murder is virtuous in his or her culture. And this is where moral relativism fails the murder, rape, assault, and theft test. These are all certain actions that can be universally considered to be bad because committing these actions requires a violation of the victim's consent, which is a violation of the principle of self-ownership, which I discussed earlier. And moral relativism offers no defense against people who act that way unless they themselves, or at least their culture, believes that those actions are wrong. There are certain parts of the world where rape is considered perfectly acceptable, namely parts of Africa and the Middle East. Relativism would have us make excuses for these gross violations of self-ownership because the rapists just have a different value system. No. There may not be anything that can be considered universally morally right, but I have shown here today that there are universal moral wrongs that must be discussed, addressed, and denounced everywhere they occur in the world. This is how moral philosophy becomes a tool to improving the lot of humankind, while relativism would attempt to render that tool useless. To quote Peter Kreeft, relativism is not rational. It is rationalization. It is not the conclusion of a rational argument. It is the rationalization of prior action. It is the repudiation of the principle that passions must be evaluated by reason and controlled by will. And on that note, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.